Hey, Joe Zarzaur here with Dr. Malone. We're here for part 2, Dr. Malone, of our series on what happens after a car wreck, basically, with a neck and back injury, at least. And the reason I felt it was important to do this series is that I felt like we should offer the public who's interested, and usually those are folks that are involved in an accident or they have a loved one involved in an accident and they want to understand the process. And I thought, okay, maybe I should do 2 or 3 videos that don't take long to watch that can run through the entire process. And so part 1 dealt with basically what happens at the wreck scene and the ER, and then what happens in regards to a lawyer after that, and do you need a lawyer and why? Why do you need a lawyer if the ER says you're fine and you can go home? I sort of touched on all that in part 1. Part 2 deals with what happens after you've gone to the ER and you've hired a firm, and hopefully us, and you've now gotten to the point where you're treating with a specialist that deals with these car wreck related injuries. And that is something that is important to understand because, first of all, I need to tell you that most doctors do not want to get involved in car wreck cases. I'll tell you that straight away. Your primary doctor, if you have one, is probably not going to want to treat you for a car wreck case. I'd say about 90% of them tell you no. You may think you have the best relationship with your primary doctor. I have a great relationship with mine, but I guarantee you his office has a policy where if I was in a wreck tonight and I called him, he'd probably tell me, I'd be upset with him, but he'd probably tell me that he was not able to see me because it's a car wreck. And I don't want to guesstimate or hypothesize as to what it is they are so reluctant to treat people. They don't like lawyers. They don't like the legal system necessarily. They don't want to get involved in the process. He's a doctor. They don't want to testify. They don't want to deal with an insurance company. What do you think?
Well, I'll add one.
Okay.
So the car accidents come with pain, and treating pain in the state of Florida now as a clinician is highly regulated. And it's not just about here's some pills. It should be a multi-system approach. So a lot of these primary care doctors aren't set up to offer that.
Okay, well, my position, doctor, I don't want to get crossways with you, but my position is that if you're my primary doctor, you quarterback me if I break my arm playing soccer. You quarterback me if I catch COVID. You quarterback me if I happen to be in a car wreck that is not my fault. And it's part of my medical history, and you're my primary doctor. So I hear what you're saying, but I think it's a disservice, in my personal opinion, and hope you don't get offended by this, but I think it's a disservice to sell your patient out just because they were in a car wreck that is not their fault. Now, if they're a drunk driver and they hurt people and they get in a wreck, and you make a moral or ethical decision that you don't want to help this person anymore, that's your business, okay? But if it's no fault of their own and they're involved in a car wreck and they're your patient long-standing, they trust you more than any other doctor in the world, and now you're saying, no, you know what, this is the biggest problem you've had in 20 years, but I can't help you. So anyway, long and short of it is, if they won't treat you, we'll find you a doctor that is a specialist, MD specialist, that will treat you. And in the hypothetical case that we've been talking about, Dr. Malone, this person had back pain, neck pain after a car wreck. Mm-hmm. We're going to cover in a different video head injuries, or traumatic brain injuries. But in this particular case, they went to the ER with back and neck pain, which is a huge amount of percentage injury-wise of our clients, okay? I don't want to take a guess, but I think last video I said 60-70% of the motor vehicle accidents, people go to the ER and they get diagnosed with a back or neck pain. And we actually showed in the part 1 the discharge instructions that you get that either say whiplash or cervical pain or back pain.
Yeah, or headache. Someone will be basic MVA, motor vehicle accident. Tell you what to do if you have symptoms.
And then they send you home, and then you talk to us, and we say to you, well, that doesn't mean you're well. That means that you're not critical, there's a huge distance between being well and not being critical, right?
Yep.
Critical means you're going to potentially die in 24, 48 hours. Mm-hmm. Well means you don't have any problems.
Yeah.
So think about the vast landscape between those two.
Yeah, and it can be as innocent as decreased range of motion. I'm not as flexible. I can't go above a certain level with my arm, and it hurts when I turn the key in the car now, or when I turn the doorknob, things like that. And those mean something.
What people typically say with neck and back pain is they have localized pain in their neck and back, which means it hurts in the neck and back. Shoulder pain, a lot of times. Headaches from neck pain, a lot of times. You can also have headaches from post-concussion syndrome.
Yep.
But you also have headaches from cervical disc injury. And so what I tell people over the phone when I'm talking to them about, they're like, in part one we covered this, but do I need a lawyer? Yes, you do if your car is in bad shape and you're not a spring chicken. So part two of this is going to deal with what happens while you're treating that makes your case, that gives us the information about your medical condition. Typically, you're going to end up with a orthopedist or they call them physical pain and rehabilitation, physical medicine and rehabilitation specialist, or
Physiatrist.
Physiatrist is the general term for them. They're all MD doctors, like Dr. Malone, but beyond Dr. Malone is an internal medicine specialist. They got a specialty in sometimes anesthesia and then a subspecialty in pain medicine or pain management is what they call it sometimes, or they're physiatrist, or they're physical rehab and medicine specialist. Either way, they're all MDs that specialize in somebody that has pain from a traumatic injury. Mm-hmm. So you're going to go to them, and they're going to be conservative at first because I hear various reasons for this. But the ER does X-rays and CT scans. You and I've talked about X-rays and CT scans and MRIs and what the difference is. But basically, the ER is looking for big ticket items, things that can kill you, and internal bleeding can kill you quickly, right? Mm-hmm. Fractures can kill you or maim you quickly, yep. Right? So they're looking for those things. They're not necessarily looking for disc injuries because those don't necessarily, many times, pose a threat to your limbs or life, yeah. Right?
Unless you have acute loss of function,
right?
In the ER.
Correct. MRIs are also expensive. They're more expensive than CT scans. They're more expensive than X-rays. So the ER is more likely to give you those, and they're not going to see a fracture many times. They're not going to see an internal bleeding, and so they're probably going to send you home with those diagnoses that we talked about. Now it's time for you to treat with a doctor. As you're treating with this doctor, at some point in the process, usually after a month or so, after the inflammation has died down, and the MRI will show something more like what is going on without the inflammation, they will order an MRI. Now, what is an MRI?
So we've talked about this before. So it's like having a black and white TV, having a traditional TV, and now this is the high-def TV where you can see not only bone, but you see bone, soft tissue, ligament, cartilage, all those other important structures in the cervical spine in this case, where the CT scan in the ER just saw really just the bony structure. That's what it focused on in the alignment of it. Here you're looking at all the other stuff around it, the discs that are between the bones, all the other ligaments that connect the bones together allow it to work as one column. So that's what we're going to get with the MRI.
All right, and the MRI is on a disc, but we can get still shots from it, and we're going to post this when we do the video, but this is what it's going to look like, and this is a cervical or a neck MRI that shows the disc. And doctor, why don't you walk through what we're looking at there?
Sure. So again, this is an actual film from a client here. So this black stripe down the middle here, that's the spinal cord. The white fluid on each side of it is the fluid that normally insulates that, okay? And so these little divots here are the discs going into that fluid space that aren't supposed to be there, the divots. So this is C6 and C7, and this is a disc that's herniated into that, what they call the fecal sac, impinging on some of the cord. So when you have a client or a patient who has symptoms, and you get this MRI, if the symptoms align with where this disc is pushing, based on their symptoms like Joe was saying, where the paresthesias, the weakness, numbness, pain, whatever in the upper extremities, which is where you would expect it, this MRI says, wow, yeah, that's the root cause of it. If this looked clean, then that'd be something where they'd say, well, maybe these extremity symptoms are a rotator cuff injury, a shoulder injury, another peripheral nerve injury.
Yeah. So now keep in mind, I want to remind you, because I keep talking about this and I talk to clients about this all the time. This person with a herniated disc in their neck left the ER with this discharge instruction. It just says cervical strain. It doesn't say anything about fracture or herniated disc, and the reason is, in the ER, they didn't have the benefit of an MRI. Because they don't run MRIs in the ER. Rarely. I'd say 1% of you will get an MRI in the ER. And that's if you walk in and say, I can't feel my legs and my arm.
Yeah.
Basically.
Yeah. It had to be, and the exam would have to back it up.
Yes. So you're not going to get the MRI more likely than not. And you're going to leave with a cervical strain. And you're going to call and you're going to say, I don't even know if this case is worth taking because they said I had a whiplash. Well, guess what? This person has a significant injury, and we'll talk about this in part 3, but this person eventually needed surgery that is well into the 6-figure value case. And a serious surgery on your neck that we're going to talk about in part 3, but this is that person's MRI. So the idea that you leave the ER thinking you're fine with cervical strain is not the right thinking. Now, my hope is for your health is that you don't have this. Some clients don't have this. Some clients go through the MRI machine with this diagnosis from the ER, and they end up and they don't have the little divot, we call it a divot, but the herniated disc at C6, 7 here, the little divot there, or indention, if you will, or the indention is not that bad and they call it a bulge. But at the end of the day, if you end up with a herniated disc, then they can't relieve the symptoms with conservative treatment, then they got to consider more invasive things that we're going to talk about in part 3. But the legal part of this, Dr. Malone, is also important. While you're going through the treatment process with your pain management physician or your physiatrist, and you're getting the MRI, I tell my clients, as soon as you get this MRI, let us hear from you so we can know. I'm going to have Dr. Malone read the MRI, the actual film. We're going to look at the actual report. And make sure they line up. We're also going to make sure that the radiologist got everything correct. And then we're going to look at it from a value standpoint, comparing how much insurance is available in your case. I usually tell clients, it's at this stage of the case where I can sort of give you a rough estimate of how long it's going to take to get this case over with, what it's going to look like on value. I can give you a range approximately. And then it's all about you treating and figuring out what's going to work for you. My hope is you treat with pain management modalities, which are shots that we're going to talk about in a minute. Various types of shots, some of which can last up to a year in pain relief, and you're able to deal with it that way. If you can't, you become a surgical candidate potentially when you have an injury like this. And we're going to talk about that in part 3. But you're looking at 6 to 9 months in stage 2 of this, if you want to call it that, where you're trying to figure out what's going on. And it's really important at that point in time that you communicate with us. The paralegal will be asking you to give us updates. I'll be asking you to give us updates. We want to know basically when you get this diagnosis, and so we can tell what's going on. If you are a candidate for the shots, they typically start with what's called trigger point injections. And trigger point injections, that's probably what you have had as a shot. It's a superficial layer shot. In other words, they're sticking the needle just into like the muscles that you can feel with your fingers. And they do it in a fashion, if it's in your neck, they do it in a fashion like this. They'll give you a series of trigger point injections. Again, the needle's not that big. It looks like a needle like you've had before for other shots. It's nothing that alarming. I mean, every needle's alarming, but it's not a really long needle, and it's not putting you under anesthesia and all that. This is the first stage. They're trying to see if they can control your pain with the least intrusive modality or treatment. Okay, that's trigger points. If the trigger points don't work or don't work long enough, then they move to what's called an epidural injection. Now, everybody knows epidural from childbirth. You've heard about it. Epidurals are more of a longer term type deadening product The deal with epidurals, though, is when they put them in your backbone, they have to know where they're sticking it, right? Because the needle's longer, there's more risk involved, right, doctor?
Oh yeah, in the right hands, there's little risk, but it's still there compared to the trigger points.
So many times the epidurals have to be done in a surgery center. They have to be done under fluoroscopy, which is the X-ray machine, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so they have a live video X-ray machine where they're watching the needle go in. The needle's longer.
Sometimes like some sedation, depending on
sedation, right? And they're trying to see if they can deaden the nerve that's causing your pain, because they're trying to figure out where the nerve is that's aggravated and can they deaden it. And if they get to the point where they figure out where your pain is coming from and they're able to isolate it and deaden it, they then move to radiofrequency ablation, which is what, doctor? Well, there's medial branch blocks,
yeah,
and then radiofrequency ablation. So walk through those two things.
So they'll use your MRI as a roadmap to begin and say that's where the discs are herniated. That's where we think that your symptoms line up based on your exam and everything we've done to this point. So then they would use, and we'll have a better image of this, but there's coming out of your spinal column. So we were just looking at a cross section of the spinal column there. Is the nerve roots, and there's the median branches that come out, and those go to your facet joints. And that's what can irritate people. I can give them their symptoms, that headache that Joe was mentioning, that arm symptoms that you might experience. And they'll initially just deaden that nerve with the median branch block. So it's like going to the dentist and getting an injection to your tooth so they can do a filling. They deaden that nerve, but that nerve stays deadened longer than just the day of the procedure. And you track your symptoms. Hey, this gave me relief for so many months. Great. They know they're in the right spot. So this is more of a diagnostic intervention than a therapeutic one. You may get some therapy from it, but you may also come back and say, Doc, it felt the same. I walked out of there with 10 out of 10 pain. I didn't even know you did it. If that's the case, they're not in the right spot, the right level. So we need to start doing more diagnostics to say what is the source of this pain. If you're one of those people that says, hey, it's 0 out of 10 and it lasted 3 months, Doc, I'm great. They're going to say, well, let's go back in there and we're going to use the same procedure, same everything, fluoroscopy, except for this time we're going to go in there and we're going to deaden that nerve permanently. We're going to ablate it, okay? It's an ablation procedure with radiofrequency. And do you need that nerve? No. I mean, really. And so getting rid of the source of the pain that communicates it to your brain is the idea there.
Right. And understand this, he made it sound like typical doctors, they underplay what's happening. They're actually burning the nerve, okay? So they go in there and they burn the nerve. Before they do that, though, they want to know they're in the right spot, and they want to know that if they burn that nerve, it's actually going to help you. So they're going to do the temporary medicine type things first. Medial branch blocks, the epidurals, those are all, like Dr. Malone said, it's target practice for them. They're trying to figure out where exactly do they need to put the burner. They don't want to put the burner in there that's going to last a year unless it's actually going to help you, right? So that's where they are. Now, if this doesn't work, if treating the nerves that are coming off the spinal cord do not work, then your pain is centrally located. In other words, the herniated disc is not just pressing on the little branches that come off the spinal cord, causing nerve injury, but the pain is coming from the central disc herniation, the spinal cord. Now keep in mind, the spinal cord is encased in these bones. So you can't get to that without a neurosurgeon involved, right? So in part 3, the central part.
It's coming right from this thick black stripe, the spinal column.
I will say this, most of the time, thankfully, even with disc herniations, the pain is coming from the facet joints or the nerves that come off the spinal cord, and these injections or radiofrequency ablations are helpful. The problem is you need them forever, for the rest of your life, many times. And even though the RFAs work for about a year, if you live 40 years, you're going to have 40, at least 20 potentially of them or more. So it's important for us to know how, what helps you, so we can formulate what your future treatment plan is going to be and how much it's going to cost you, so we can come up with a case value. So in part 3, we're going to talk about what happens if these injections don't work, like the hypothetical client we're talking about here. In this real case, it didn't work for her, and she ended up going to see a neurosurgeon. So in part 3, we're going to talk about neurosurgery as a result of a car wreck where you get released from the ER with a neck strain diagnosis, thinking you're okay. If you have questions about car wrecks or any kind of personal injury case, you can find us on the web at zarzaurlaw.com, or you can call us at 855-HIRE-JOE. Thank you.